The room went silent the moment her eyes landed on his wrist. Not the soft, respectful silence of wealth, but the sharp kind. The kind that cuts. The kind that makes people hold their breath without knowing why. In a showroom built to worship money, one small detail had disrupted the order, and everyone felt it at once. The place was spotless. Too spotless. White marble floors reflected the ceiling lights like mirrors. Glass walls stood cold and clear, separating luxury from the outside world. The cars sat perfectly still, polished like art pieces, untouched, flawless. This was a room where mistakes weren't allowed, where dirt didn't belong, where people like him were only expected to pass through, never linger. She stood in the center of it all like she owned the air itself. Heels sharp, posture perfect, young, beautiful, powerful. A self-made billionaire whose name was spoken with respect in boardrooms and envy online. She was used to people noticing her, watching her, moving out of her way. This space was made for people like her. People with money. People with control. And yet, she wasn't the one being watched anymore. Her gaze had locked onto something unexpected. Something that didn't match the room. Something that challenged everything she thought she understood about success. A black mechanic. His hands were darkened with grease, the kind that sinks into skin no matter how hard you scrub. Oil stains marked his jacket, proof of long hours and real labor. He stood near one of the luxury cars, not admiring it, not dreaming about it, but working on it. Focused, grounded, real. And then there was the watch. It rested on his wrist without apology. Heavy, confident. A Rolex. Not the flashy kind people buy to impress. This one was different. Vintage. Rare. The kind collectors chase for years. The kind that doesn't beg for attention but commands it quietly. Worth more than most people's homes. Her steps slowed. Her eyes narrowed. The watch caught the light as he moved his hand. Just a small motion, but it was enough. The gold shimmered under the showroom lights, and suddenly the room felt tighter. Like something was wrong. Like a rule had been broken. The air shifted. Sales associates stiffened. Their smiles froze halfway. Eyes darted from the watch to the man to her. No one spoke, but the judgments came fast. You could feel them forming, stacking on top of each other. Assumptions built on nothing but appearance. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. The watch looked out of place. Like it didn't belong in that room. Like it didn't belong on him. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it, trying to fit it into a story that felt comfortable. It wouldn't fit. Nice watch, she said. Her voice was calm, smooth, polite, but underneath it lived doubt. Suspicion wrapped in silk. The kind of tone that smiles while questioning your right to exist. He didn't jump, didn't rush to explain, didn't laugh nervously. He looked up slowly. Their eyes met. His gaze was steady, calm, unbothered. No fear, no apology, no need to impress. Thanks, he said. One word. That was it. It landed harder than a speech ever could. Something shifted inside her chest. Tightened. That wasn't the reaction she expected. She'd expected a story, a defense, a joke, something to make her comfortable. But all she got was thanks. Simple, closed, final. The room reacted immediately. Whispers spread like smoke. Someone leaned closer to someone else. A sales associate glanced toward the manager, eyebrows raised. The manager stiffened, eyes locked on the mechanic now. Someone scoffed quietly. Another shook their head just slightly. No one said the words out loud, but everyone thought them. How could he afford that? The question hung heavy in the air, thick with judgment. The kind of question that isn't really a question at all. It's an accusation. She crossed her arms slowly. Her smile stayed polite, controlled. But behind her eyes was a challenge. A silent test. A belief that something about him didn't add up. Do you belong here? The mechanic felt it. He always did. That look. That pause before respect. That moment where people decided who he was before he opened his mouth. He'd felt it his whole life. In classrooms. In stores. In meetings. In places where his presence was tolerated but never trusted. He looked back down at his work. Metal met metal. A bolt tightened. The sound was steady. Familiar. Honest. His hands moved with confidence, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Because they had. He acted like her presence didn't matter. Like the whispers didn't reach him. Like the watch on his wrist was just another part of his day. That calm unsettled her. She wasn't used to being ignored. She wasn't used to unanswered questions. She wasn't used to people existing in her space without reacting to her power. Her curiosity sharpened into suspicion. The manager moved closer now, pretending to check a display while watching the mechanic from the corner of his eye. A sales associate whispered, "That model costs more than this car." A quiet laugh followed, sharp and dismissive. The mechanic heard it. Of course he did. His jaw tightened for a brief moment, barely noticeable. Then he exhaled slowly and kept working. No anger, no defense, just dignity. That choice made the room even more uncomfortable. She studied him more closely now. His posture, his stillness, his confidence. She searched for cracks, for guilt, for fear, but she found none. Just a man doing his job. Just a watch resting on a wrist like it had every right to be there. Her mind refused to accept it. This place had rules, patterns, expectations, and he broke them without saying a word. She told herself she believed in hard work. She told herself she respected people who built something from nothing. After all, she had done exactly that. But something about him challenged her in a way she didn't expect. She took a step closer. The sound of her heel echoed through the room, louder than it should have. Heads turned. The whispers quieted. The tension thickened. He paused his work, but didn't look up right away. His hands rested calmly on the car. Steady, grounded. The room held its breath. She could walk away. Pretend she hadn't noticed. Let the moment fade back into polished silence. But she didn't. Not yet. Because something about this felt unfinished. Unresolved. The watch. The confidence. The refusal to explain. It stirred something uncomfortable inside her. Something she wasn't ready to name. She watched him, waiting for him to break. Waiting for him to look up and offer an explanation. Waiting for him to make her feel right. He didn't. He simply stood there, existing, refusing to shrink. The whispers started again, quieter this time, but sharper. Someone shifted closer to security. Someone else glanced at her, waiting to see what she would do. Power waited for her decision. She didn't know it yet, but this moment was already bigger than a watch. Bigger than a showroom. Bigger than both of them. Because sometimes it's not the loud confrontations that expose people. Sometimes it's silence. A stare. A single word that refuses to bow. And as she stood there, staring at a watch she believed didn't belong, she had no idea that the truth behind it was about to shake the room in ways she couldn't control. The tension lingered. Unresolved. Waiting. The questions didn't rush in. They crept. Soft at first. Almost polite. The kind that pretend to be harmless while slowly closing in. In rooms like this, disrespect rarely announces itself. It whispers. It leans close. It waits for permission. A sales associate leaned toward her, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "We've had issues before," he said, eyes flicking toward the mechanic without ever fully looking at him. The words were vague, but the meaning was sharp. Trouble. Suspicion. Assumptions dressed up as concern. Another associate glanced at the mechanic's hands, then at his jacket, then back at the watch. That look said everything. He'd already been judged. Already been sentenced. No evidence needed. She stood there, watching it all unfold. She noticed how the space around him seemed to shrink. How people stepped just a little farther away. How conversations happened over him, around him, but never to him. Voices softened when they spoke to her, respectful and careful, but turned cold and clipped when they addressed him at all. Power moved quietly in that room, and she was at the center of it. Finally, she spoke again. "Where'd you get the Rolex?" Her voice cut through the whispers like a blade. The room froze. Even the air felt still. Conversations died mid-breath. Every eye turned toward him, waiting, watching. This was no longer a casual moment. This was an interrogation dressed as curiosity. He didn't answer right away. He wiped his hands slowly on a rag, the grease staining the fabric darker with every pass. His movements were calm, deliberate. He refused to be rushed, refused to let their urgency control him. "Bought it," he said. 2 words. Simple. Clean. A scoff broke the silence before anyone could stop it. "On a mechanic's salary," a man muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people chuckled quietly. Others nodded. The judgment felt almost comforting to them now. Like they'd found solid ground again. Like the world made sense once more. She didn't stop it. She didn't correct them. Didn't shut it down. She let the moment breathe. Let the tension stretch tight between them. She watched his face closely, waiting for something. Embarrassment. Anger. Fear. "Mind telling me how?" she asked. Now it was official. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a trial. Every eye locked onto him. The mechanic. The black man with the watch that didn't fit their story. The room leaned in, hungry for an explanation that would make them feel right. He felt the burn rise in his chest. That familiar heat. The urge to explain himself. To list accomplishments. To show receipts. To prove that he belonged. That he wasn't a mistake in their perfect room. He'd felt this before. Too many times. In interviews where his resume was questioned harder than others. In stores where he was followed aisle by aisle. In meetings where his ideas were doubted until repeated by someone else. He knew this feeling. But he didn't raise his voice. Didn't rush his words. Didn't beg. "I don't owe anyone my story," he said quietly. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They landed heavy. The room reacted instantly. Faces tightened. Jaws clenched. Someone rolled their eyes. That answer didn't satisfy them. It didn't comfort them. It challenged them. It denied them the power they believed they had. Who did he think he was? Security was called just in case. The phrase was spoken softly, but it echoed loudly. A manager stepped closer, his smile thin and forced. "Sir, could you step back for a moment?" he said, already assuming the answer should be yes. Respect peeled away from him piece by piece. First the whispers, then the questions, now the threat of removal. All while she stood there watching. She told herself she was just observing, that she was being careful, that this was how leadership worked. Question first, doubt second, decide last. She believed power gave her the right to ask, to press, to demand answers. But she wasn't seeing everything. She missed the way his hands never shook, even as security drew closer. She missed the steadiness in his posture, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed, the way his eyes held no fear. This wasn't a man caught in a lie. This was a man who had survived worse than their judgment. Security hovered near him now, close enough to feel, close enough to remind him of where he stood in their world. The manager cleared his throat again, impatience creeping in. "Sir, we just need to make sure everything's in order," he said. The mechanic looked at him calmly. "It is," he replied. No anger. No apology. That calm made them uneasy. People who expect fear don't know what to do with dignity. She studied him again, trying to regain control of the moment. Something about this wasn't going the way she expected. He wasn't folding, wasn't explaining, wasn't playing the role they'd written for him. And that made them push harder. A woman near the counter whispered, "If he has nothing to hide, why won't he just say?" Another voice answered, "Exactly." Agreement spread quickly. Silence, to them, was guilt. They didn't understand silence born from self-respect. He stood there, surrounded, judged, measured by people who knew nothing about him. He felt the weight of it pressed down, but he didn't let it show. He'd learned long ago that reacting only feeds the fire. She watched his face closely now, searching for cracks, for something she could point to and say, "There, that's it. That's why I was right." But she found none. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar crawl up her spine. Uncertainty. This was supposed to be simple. A question, an answer, a resolution that placed everyone back in their proper place. But the more they pushed him, the more solid he seemed, the more unmovable. The manager leaned toward her, voice low. "Do you want us to handle this?" he asked. She hesitated. For the first time since she'd entered the room, she wasn't sure. The mechanic noticed that pause, the smallest crack in her confidence. He didn't smile, didn't react. He just waited. Because men who have endured real struggle don't flinch at shallow judgment. They've been questioned by life itself, tested by things far heavier than suspicion in a showroom. The room buzzed with tension now. Thick, electric. Everyone felt it. Something was coming. Something unresolved. She thought she was in control. She wasn't. And the closer they moved toward forcing an answer, the closer they crept toward a truth none of them were ready to hear. The room held its breath again, waiting, unprepared for what was about to be revealed. Security stood close enough now that he could feel their presence without turning his head. Heavy shoes on polished floors, hands resting near belts. Not touching him, not yet, but close enough to remind him how fast dignity can be taken away. One wrong word, one wrong move. That was all it would take for this moment to turn into a public humiliation he would never forget. The room had shifted again. Not loud, not chaotic, just tense, tight, like a held breath that had gone on too long. Every person in that showroom felt it pressing against their chest. They were waiting for something to break. Him, or the truth. The billionaire's voice cut through the silence, sharper than before. Gone was the polite tone. Gone was the careful curiosity. What remained was authority. Show me proof, she said. Or leave. The words landed hard. This was no longer about a watch. No longer about curiosity. This was power demanding submission. Proof or punishment. Explain yourself or disappear. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then the mechanic exhaled. Slowly. Not the sigh of defeat. Not the breath of fear. It was the kind of breath someone takes before telling a truth they've learned to carry quietly. The kind that says, I didn't want to do this, but you pushed. He reached into his pocket. The room reacted instantly. Security shifted. A hand moved closer. Someone gasped softly. A sales associate stiffened, already imagining how this would end. They expected anger. A confrontation. Something messy they could point to later and say, see? We were right. But there was no anger. No drama. He pulled out his phone. Just a phone. He unlocked it calmly. No shaking hands. No rushed movements. His face stayed neutral, steady, grounded. He tapped the screen once. Then again. The soft sound of glass under fingertip echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. Then he turned the screen toward her. She leaned in without realizing it. And everything changed. Her expression shifted first. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It started with her eyes. The way they narrowed, then widened just slightly. The way her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. Confusion flickered. Then recognition. Then something close to disbelief. The screen showed headlines. Real ones. Bold text. Familiar fonts. Business articles she had read before. Numbers that made people stop scrolling. Valuations. Acquisition announcements. Industry praise. And there it was. A company logo she knew very well. Her company. The mechanic spoke, his voice calm, even, almost gentle. I sold my first automotive AI system 6 years ago, he said. Built it in my garage. Your firm acquired it. Silence didn't just fill the room. It crashed into it. Like glass shattering without sound. No whispers now. No scoffs. No judgment. Just shock. Thick and heavy and undeniable. He scrolled. Patents appeared. His name listed clearly. Contracts with signatures that mattered. Dates. Numbers. A net worth figure that made more than one person swallow hard. The Rolex suddenly made sense. Not a flex. Not a lie. Not stolen. Earned. A retirement gift to myself, he added quietly, almost as an afterthought. After I cashed out. No one laughed this time. No one questioned him. No one spoke at all. He lowered the phone, but didn't put it away. Didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. He looked around the room, not with pride, not with anger, but with a quiet awareness. He saw it on their faces. The shift. The collapse of every assumption they'd leaned on so comfortably just minutes before. I still work on engines, he continued. Because I love it. Not because I need to. The words hung in the air. Love. Choice. Freedom. Things no one had ever considered when they looked at him before. The billionaire felt her throat tighten. A sensation she wasn't used to. This wasn't the feeling of losing money or a deal. This was something deeper. Security stood close enough now that he could feel their presence without turning his head. Heavy shoes on polished floors. Hands resting near belts. Not touching him. Not yet, but close enough to remind him how fast dignity can be taken away. One wrong word. One wrong move. That was all it would take for this moment to turn into a public humiliation he would never forget. The room had shifted again. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just tense. Tight. Like a held breath that had gone on too long. Every person in that showroom felt it pressing against their chest. They were waiting for something to break. Him. Or the truth. The billionaire's voice cut through the silence, sharper than before. Gone was the polite tone. Gone was the careful curiosity. What remained was authority. Show me proof, she said. Or leave. The words landed hard. This was no longer about a watch. No longer about curiosity. This was power demanding submission. Proof or punishment. Explain yourself or disappear. For a brief moment, no one moved. Then the mechanic exhaled. Slowly. Not the sigh of defeat. Not the breath of fear. It was the kind of breath someone takes before telling a truth they've learned to carry quietly. The kind that says, I didn't want to do this, but you pushed. He reached into his pocket. The room reacted instantly. Security shifted. A hand moved closer. Someone gasped softly. A sales associate stiffened, already imagining how this would end. They expected anger. A confrontation. Something messy they could point to later and say, see? We were right. But there was no anger. No drama. He pulled out his phone. Just a phone. He unlocked it calmly. No shaking hands. No rushed movements. His face stayed neutral, steady, grounded. He tapped the screen once. Then again. The soft sound of glass under fingertip echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. Then he turned the screen toward her. She leaned in without realizing it. And everything changed. Her expression shifted first. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It started with her eyes. The way they narrowed, then widened just slightly. The way her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. Confusion flickered. Then recognition. Then something close to disbelief. The screen showed headlines. Real ones. Bold text. Familiar fonts. Business articles she had read before. Numbers that made people stop scrolling. Valuations. Acquisition announcements. Industry praise. And there it was. A company logo she knew very well. Her company. The mechanic spoke, his voice calm, even, almost gentle. I sold my first automotive AI system 6 years ago, he said. Built it in my garage. Your firm acquired it. Silence didn't just fill the room. It crashed into it, like glass shattering without sound. No whispers now. No scoffs. No judgment. Just shock. Thick and heavy and undeniable. He scrolled. Patents appeared. His name listed clearly. Contracts with signatures that mattered. Dates. Numbers. A net worth figure that made more than one person swallow hard. The Rolex suddenly made sense. Not a flex. Not a lie. Not stolen. Earned. A retirement gift to myself, he added quietly, almost as an afterthought. After I cashed out. No one laughed this time. No one questioned him. No one spoke at all. He lowered the phone, but didn't put it away. Didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. He looked around the room, not with pride, not with anger, but with a quiet awareness. He saw it on their faces. The shift. The collapse of every assumption they'd leaned on so comfortably just minutes before. I still work on engines, he continued. Because I love it. Not because I need to. The words hung in the air. Love. Choice. Freedom. Things no one had ever considered when they looked at him before. The billionaire felt her throat tighten. A sensation she wasn't used to. This wasn't the feeling of losing money or a deal. This was something deeper. The room felt different now. Smaller. Quieter. Like the walls had moved closer after hearing too much truth at once. The polished floors didn't shine the same way anymore. The glass didn't feel so untouchable. Everything that once screamed power now felt exposed. The billionaire stood still for a long moment. Her confidence, so sharp before, had softened into something heavier. Realer. She swallowed, and for the first time that day, the pause wasn't strategic. It was human. She took a step forward. I owe you an apology, she said. Her voice wasn't polished anymore. No boardroom edge. No practiced calm. Just honesty, fragile and unsure. The kind that costs more than money to give. The mechanic looked at her. Really looked at her. Not the title. Not the wealth. Just the woman standing there, finally stripped of certainty. He nodded once. Apologies don't erase moments, he said. His voice was steady. Not cold. Not kind. Just true. But they can change what comes next. The words settled gently but firmly between them. She turned and waved her hand, dismissing the staff. The manager hesitated, then nodded. Security stepped away, their presence no longer needed, no longer justified. One by one, people drifted out of the room, glancing back like witnesses leaving a courtroom after the verdict had been read. Soon, it was just the two of them. For the first time that day, she listened. Not as a billionaire. Not as a decision-maker. Not as someone used to being obeyed. But as a person forced to look inward. They didn't rush the conversation. There was no need. The silence between them was no longer hostile. It was reflective. She spoke first, slowly. Choosing her words with care, she usually reserved for high-stakes deals. I thought I was being careful, she admitted. I told myself I was protecting my space. My brand. My company. She shook her head slightly. But I see now I was protecting something else. My comfort. He didn't interrupt. She continued. I saw confidence and assumed deception. I saw skill and assumed fraud. I saw you. Her voice caught for a second. And I assumed you couldn't be what you are. The weight of the admission hung heavy. He listened without judgment. Without triumph. He'd waited his whole life for moments like this. Not for validation, but for honesty. I've been here before, he said quietly. Different rooms. Same feeling. People don't always know they're doing it. But that doesn't make it hurt less. She nodded slowly. I know, she said. Or at least, I'm starting to. They talked about struggle, about long nights and quiet sacrifices, about building something without anyone believing in you until it was too big to ignore. She spoke about pressure, about being young in rooms full of older men who doubted her until she proved herself again and again. He listened, then said gently, imagine having to prove yourself before you're even allowed to speak. That sentence landed deep. She felt it settle somewhere she couldn't shake. I never thought of it that way, she admitted. That's the thing, he replied. You don't have to. The world already makes sure we do. She lowered her gaze. Not in shame, but in recognition. I was wrong, she said. Not just today. Before today. He nodded once more. I know. There was no anger in it. Just acceptance. The kind that doesn't excuse, but doesn't punish either. He didn't gloat. Didn't lecture. Didn't tell her what she should do next. He didn't need to. Instead, he said one sentence. Quiet. Simple. Unforgettable. Respect shouldn't require proof. The words echoed in her mind. They followed her long after he left the showroom. Long after the cars were covered and the lights dimmed. Long after the moment had passed. Weeks later, she sat in a different room. A conference room. Familiar. Controlled. Powerful. But she wasn't the same person who usually sat at the head of the table. She spoke differently now. She announced a new initiative inside her company. Funding for overlooked innovators. Protection for creators who didn't fit the expected image of success. Systems designed to challenge bias before it could hide behind process and policy. There were questions. Of course there were. Concerns. Doubts. Some executives shifted in their seats the way the sales associates had shifted that day. She didn't back down. This isn't about optics, she said firmly. This is about dignity. No press release followed. No headline chasing. She didn't need applause. She needed change. Because she'd seen her reflection that day in the showroom, and she didn't like who she was becoming. And the mechanic? He went back to his garage. Same early mornings. Same worn jacket. Same grease-stained hands. Same love for engines and the quiet satisfaction of fixing what others couldn't. The Rolex still rested on his wrist. Not louder. Not brighter. Just the same. But something had shifted. Not just in that room. In the world, just a little. Because one person had chosen humility over ego. And one man had chosen dignity over defense. They would likely never meet again. They didn't need to. The lesson had already been learned. And it wasn't about wealth. Or watches. Or who owns what. It was about this. Never measure a person's worth by how comfortable they make your assumptions feel. Never confuse silence with weakness or confidence with guilt. And never forget that true power doesn't come from money, titles, or control. True power begins the moment humility finally listens.